For centuries, the Atlantic Ocean was seen as the edge of the world, a terrifying void. But 250 years ago, it became a bridge for the most audacious experiment in human history. In 1776, 13 colonies did the unthinkable. They challenged the greatest empire on earth. To the aristocratic courts of Europe, this was madness. To the common man in the streets of Paris or the taverns of Amsterdam, it was a spark of hope. Today, as we mark the Sestercentennial of the United States, we look back from a European perspective. We see a nation that is, in essence, Europe's daughter, born of our philosophy, raised in our conflicts, and eventually, the savior of our peace. This is not just a story of a country. It is a story of a shared destiny. The intellectual DNA of America was mapped out in the coffee houses of London and the salons of Paris. The New World provided the soil, but the seeds were European. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were not just politicians. They were children of the Enlightenment. When we read the Declaration of Independence today, we hear the echoes of John Locke's natural rights and Montesquieu's theories on the separation of power. For our European audience, it is vital to remember, America was the first place where European ideals were put into practice without the baggage of thousand-year-old monarchies. It was the Enlightenment's proof of concept, the fire of revolution, and the French connection. The American Revolution was a global event. Without the French Navy and the tactical genius of the Marquis de Lafayette, the map of the world might look very different today. Europe wasn't just a spectator, we were participants. Lafayette represents the bridge between our worlds, a French aristocrat who bled for American liberty. His return to France sparked the flames that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. This era reminds us that the quest for liberty is a contagious fever, one that crossed the ocean back and forth, forever altering the European soul. 1812, the Second Independence. By the early 19th century, Europe was consumed by the Napoleonic Wars. In the midst of this chaos, America found itself at war with Britain again in 1812. This period is often overlooked, but for the European observer, it was the moment America proved it wasn't a one-hit wonder. Despite the burning of the White House, the young republic held its ground. This era marked the transition of America from a fragile experiment to a permanent fixture on the global stage. It was during these years that the American identity began to harden, no longer just British subjects abroad, but a distinct people with a distinct destiny. The agony of the Civil War, for a continent like Europe, defined by centuries of border disputes and ethnic wars, the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a terrifying mirror. It was the ultimate test. Could a democracy survive itself? Abraham Lincoln became a figure of obsession for European intellectuals. If the Union fell, the cause of self-government globally would have died with it. The abolition of slavery wasn't just an American domestic policy. It was a moral earthquake that resonated in the hearts of every European liberal. When the war ended, the world saw a nation that had been baptized in fire, ready to emerge as a global titan. The industrial giant and the Great Migration. Between 1870 and 1920, the greatest movement of people in history occurred. Millions of our grandparents and great-grandparents from the villages of Italy, the fjords of Norway, and the plains of Poland boarded ships for New York. America became the safety valve of Europe. When poverty or oppression became too much, there was always the promise of the West. This era created a blood bond between our continents that can never be broken. Every skyscraper in Chicago and every rail track in the Midwest carries the sweat of European labor. We didn't just give America our ideas, we gave them our children. To world wars, the return of the prodigal son, the 20th century was Europe's darkest hour. Twice, the cradle of civilization turned into a slaughterhouse. And twice, the new world came back to save the old, for the generation that lived through it, and those who grew up in its shadow. The sight of American jeeps entering liberated towns remains an iconic image of hope. From the Meuse-Argonne to the Colville-sur-Mer cemetery, the soil of Europe is sanctified by American blood. The Marshall Plan was the final act of this dramatic gesture of such immense generosity that it allowed Europe to rise from the ashes and become the prosperous union it is today. The cultural superpower and the Cold War. After the wars came the American century. For the 35 to 60 plus age group, America was the soundtrack of our youth. It was the blue jeans, the rock and roll, and the moon landing that we watched on grainy television sets. But it was also the sentinel of liberty during the Cold War, the presence of American troops in West Germany and the diplomatic shield of NATO allowed Europe to focus on integration and peace. When the Berlin Wall crumbled in 1989, it was a victory for the shared values that were first penned in Philadelphia in 1776. The next 250 years, as we stand in 2026, the world is changing. New powers are rising, and old alliances are being tested. But as we celebrate these 250 years, one truth remains: the bond between Europe and America is not one of mere convenience, but of shared soul. We have argued, we have competed, and we have disagreed. But we have always moved in the same direction toward the horizon of liberty. America is the greatest mirror Europe has ever had. In its successes, we see our potential. In its struggles, we see our challenges. Happy 250th birthday, America. May the next 2.5 centuries be as bold, as turbulent, and as magnificent as the last.